أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to again send His greatest peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all the blessings He has given us, and the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated and loyal on the path of our Master after the Prophet, the commander of the faithful, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and his message, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Dear respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is truly an honor to continue to be blessed with the mercy of the holy month of Ramadan. Now we are about 10 days into Shahr Ramadan al-Mubarak, and we are about 1/3 through, and we have about 20 more days left for us to continue to try to pursue a better me, to try to improve ourselves, to try to enhance and develop our state of beings, so that by the end of Shahr Ramadan al-Mubarak we could walk away and say that we did something, that we improved, that we developed a new good habit, that we removed a bad habit. And then it's an ongoing journey beyond Shahr Ramadan al-Mubarak. Now in these nights we have been talking about some of the practical steps that all of us could pursue to try to improve ourselves. And we went systematically, one step at a time, one after the other. Last night we talked about one of the most important steps, which is to have the right intention and to have sincerity in everything that we do as something that is underlying in every and each action and deed that we commit. We said that what gives value to an action, what gives value to a deed is the intention behind it. And as we're trying to improve ourselves, we need to reflect on the different intentions that we have when we do things. What that intention is. Why am I doing something? Who am I doing it for? And that when we try to climb up the ladder and elevate ourselves, we need to make sure that we have the right intention, the sincere intention that could allow us to grow into seeking closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So last time we talked about the intention and how to develop a sincere intention. Tonight, inshallah, we will pick up and continue with the 8th step.
And that 8th step is looking at silence. Now, you might be thinking, what do you mean by silence? So just all of us just stop talking? Essentially with this step, going after the intention and the sincerity that's so significant for our conduct and our behavior, but looking at the 8th step being, when do I speak and when do I not speak? And the importance of realizing how to speak and at what times. And when I'm not speaking, when I'm practicing the silence, and inshallah we're going to be looking at some key examples from the Quran and from the Holy Prophet ﷺ and his Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. When does silence actually become so effective for our growth as individuals in the scheme of and pursuit of a better me? So we're going to look at when to be silent, when to speak. And when we're speaking, how do we speak? And even in that silence, what kind of thoughts, what kind of conduct should we be giving or should we be showing, not only for the people around us, but for ourselves and in our intention towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So tying the steps before this, from step 7 yesterday with intention and sincerity, and the steps before, and then going into that practical step of when do I speak, when do I not speak.
Now, we said yesterday when we talked about intention that if we truly want to become better individuals and try to improve our intention, what we should have before us and everything that we do is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is truly the center of our existence, of our being. That in everything that we do, we try to see what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is this going to make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is this going to displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And on that notion, there's a few words that we would like to reflect on and contemplate on in these nights. Be conscious of Allah, O servants of Allah. So these are some of the words that we want to reflect on to start off the lecture, and inshallah we will continue with the topic of silence. Be conscious of Allah, O servants of Allah. Race your time of death with your good deeds. Buy what will remain for you with what will leave you. And leave because you are being called to leave. Get ready for death because it is a shadow upon you.
Be a people who were notified, who were told, and then they woke up. Be a people that they knew that this world is not their home, so they changed. Knowing that God did not create you in vain, nor did He leave you without caring for you. There is no distance between any of you and either heaven or hell except that death that should befall upon you. Being a people that acknowledge this reality, that are contemplative, that are reflective, and move in that direction in betterment of themselves towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And brothers and sisters, in that contemplation, just think of those words and see how, practically speaking, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us through His verses, tells us through the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi and his Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, all these reminders of not being too attached to this world and the things within it, not being attached to materialism, being attached to material things. And see how it'll actually free ourselves and clear our thinking when we realize what our true goals should be. Now I just wanted to also make a quick correction. We mentioned that tonight is the 8th step. It's actually the 7th step. Yesterday we finished the 6th step, being intention and sincerity. Tonight is the 7th step.
Now we'll continue with the 7th step. And here what we're talking about in essence is our tongue. And when should we be silent and when we should speak up. Because our Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam tell us that our tongue can be a means to attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a mechanism to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying things that displease Him. So to start off this conversation, we'll talk about something that might be rather interesting, which is this whole concept and notion of being silent, silence. So there's a beautiful story that illustrates an example of when silence can be a good thing, a positive thing, which is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses Lady Maryam alayhi salam, Sayyidah Maryam alayhi salam, who is a lady that we revere at the highest level in the religion of Islam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses Lady Maryam alayhi salam and He tells her, eat, drink, and be comforted. Then if you see any humans, say, indeed I have vowed a fast to the all-beneficent, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I will not speak to any human beings today. So this is a fast, a vow that Sayyidah Maryam alayhi salam took, which was that for a certain period of time, that she would not speak to anyone. Regardless of what the situation is, no matter what's confronting her, she won't speak, she's silent. Now Jalal, what's the significance of that, especially that story in the Holy Quran?
The Prophet actually elaborates on this story from the Holy Quran of Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam. And he tells us in one of the narrations that's recorded of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "Inna as-sawma laysa min at-ta'ami wash-sharabi wahda." that fasting is not just from food and drink by itself. Indeed, Maryam alayhi salam, she told and she said, indeed, I have vowed a fast to the All-Beneficent. Meaning, she made a vow of silence. So protect your tongues and redirect your gazes away from the forbidden. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling us here, take the example of Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam, especially when you yourself are fasting, especially in the holy month of Ramadan. It's not fasting from food and water only. If really we're only fasting from food and water, like we mentioned in previous nights, then essentially we're just going hungry and we're going thirsty. But he's telling us, take the example of Sayyidah Maryam alayhi salam when she made a vow of silence. And her vow of silence was a testament to her belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in practicing the silence, and in practicing the sense of saving her gaze, or redirecting her gaze from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, she was truly practicing a fast in which she was purifying herself and bringing herself closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Now that last part of that hadith where he says, so protect your tongues and redirect your gazes, there's an emphasis here on lowering the gaze. And we want to talk about that for a few minutes, segue into that for a few minutes, and then we'll continue the conversation on silence and speaking. So this whole idea of lowering the gaze, we hear that a lot of times, that the religion of Islam and in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses both males and females, and He tells us to reduce our vision, to lower our gaze. And in Surah An-Nur in particular, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has two verses, verse 30 and verse 31. In verse 30, He addresses the males. And He tells us, dear brothers, to lower our gaze. Lower our gaze. Reduce our vision is another translation. And in verse 31, He continues and addresses the females. And He says the same exact thing to the females. He says, females, reduce your vision. Lower your gaze. Now on that note, Jalal, very quickly and briefly, what is meant by lowering your gaze, reducing your vision, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing in Surah An-Nur?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that of the things that I've forbidden, or the things that I forbade upon you, to not allow yourself to look at those things. So for example, if I'm a young man or I'm a young lady and I see someone from the opposite gender walking in front of me, and I know if I'm going to look at them, I know that looking at them will induce certain things that are lustful, that are haram, that are going to give me some thoughts that I know I shouldn't have. That's a kind of like a practical example of needing to practice that lowering of the gaze. And just to give an example, I remember one time we were sitting as a group, as a gathering, and we were talking about this whole dynamic of lowering the gaze, males and females. And usually the idea is males needing to lower their gaze from females that are not necessarily dressed appropriately, right? So one sister mentions, well, I saw a brother that was dressed so tight and with a muscle shirt and pants so tight that I wouldn't wear those pants, and he was walking in front of me and I had to lower my gaze. So it's not just about you guys. Okay. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Holy Quran, in that verse after verse, for the believing men to lower their gaze, for the believing women to lower their gaze, to protect themselves. Really, essentially, and we see it from the verse, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala associates this lowering of the gaze with protecting ourselves. Why? Because that one look that we might have, that's purposeful. So people might ask, what if I saw someone that I know I shouldn't be looking at? It's inappropriate for me to look at, right? Male and female. And again, we're emphasizing male and female. And I looked and I saw that person, then I turned away. Well, that first look accidentally, that first look of just acknowledgement that you didn't know it was there, and you looked and you saw it and you turned away, that's fine. The look of purpose, the look of I'm going to look at that person, right? One brother made a joke once. He's like, what if I look and I just take one long look? Like, you're being humorous, but of course you know that it's purposeful. You're purposefully looking at the individual whom you should be lowering your gaze from, right? And we have also this dynamic, and just to mention it, of this whole idea, well, if this person is purposely dressing in this way, they want people to look at them. So it's not my fault if I look at them and they're dressed that certain way, right? Some brothers might say, why are those sisters dressed like that? They're dressed inappropriately. They're not dressed modestly. They should expect people to look at them. Well, don't stray away from the topic here. It's not about what they're intending, it's about what you're intending. It could be someone who's of Islam or someone who's not of Islam. You can have a Muslim or a non-Muslim. It could be someone that is not of your faith that walks by and you know you shouldn't look and you don't look. You lower your gaze. Now, what if you don't lower your gaze? Say, what is a practical way of looking at, let's say, okay, khalas, no, I can't. I make the mistake, I can't lower my gaze. I look, I see, I check people out, male and female. What's the practical implication of that?
The practical implication is that it's very detrimental for ourselves. And actually yesterday we were at a gathering and someone asked a question. He said, what if I look at something haram, inappropriate, I observe it, but I don't act upon it? And you guys fill in the blanks. So I see something that's inappropriate, that's haram, but I just look at it. Eye candy. But I'm not gonna do anything and act upon that which I see. So we told him very simply that, number one, the fact that you're saying this is inappropriate, that this is haram, should tell you that this is something that you shouldn't get near, that you shouldn't look at, that you shouldn't observe. Very simple, at a very fundamental level. Number two, we have to recognize that we have internal desires and that we're tempted. And that one temptation can lead to the other. And you might start off with just looking at something, just observing something with your eyes. But that can build into something else. And then you could have a chain of effects where one sin leads to the other, one inappropriate thing leads to the other, and you could fall into doing something very tragic, very detrimental. Now that's on one level. The other issue here, and here we're being very real, and when we're discussing how we're going to come about and approach this topic, because it might be a sensitive topic, we said we're going to be very upfront, because this is something that a lot of us face, especially as we're growing up. Middle school, high school, you're around a lot of people, and this works both ways for males and females. You're around a lot of people that might not dress appropriately, that might not carry themselves appropriately, and you're engaging with them on one level or another, whether it's through your schoolwork, your peers, your friends, whatever the case may be. You go to the mall, you go into certain stores, and the first thing that you see is a big poster of something inappropriate. You're watching a movie. You're watching the World Cup, and all these commercials that pop up left and right. How many of you guys are watching the World Cup? That's a good number. Actually, the other day we were preparing for the lecture, and we watched the last 10 minutes of the Netherlands game, the penalty kicks, and as we were watching, a commercial came up, and we actually talked about it for a second. We said, subhanAllah, you look at all these commercials, and what do they have? What's the common denominator with all commercials nowadays? Woman. You want to sell a product? Put a woman on there. So, Jalal, in all of these cases, we feel like sometimes, honestly, we're just bombarded. We look left, there's something inappropriate. We look right, there's something inappropriate. Sometimes they tell us look down, you look down, and there's something inappropriate. So what do you do?
And really, when it comes down to it, it's hard. It's tough. We're not saying there's a simple formula to it. And essentially, our scholars, they tell us, the scholars, train yourself. Train yourself and train hard. Keep on trying. Keep on moving forward. Don't give up on yourself. Let's say you failed that one time. Excuse me. You looked. You shouldn't have looked. Don't keep on looking, right? Oh, I looked once, I looked twice. Okay, don't keep, I'm looking already, so I'm just gonna keep on looking. Keep on moving yourself in a direction where you are correcting yourself. Now, beyond the World Cup, I mean, we're American here, so we watch football a lot. Not football, football, right? So, who's watched the Super Bowl? I remember one year, we were watching the Super Bowl at my aunt's house. And at the halftime show, there was a very interesting dynamic going on. And I remember we were all busy, we were just eating, talking, and then I looked up and I seen this dancer on the stage and she was dancing and singing, and I was like, Khalte, please, let's change it, please. Let's, she's like, oh, okay, sorry. And we all know it's inappropriate. None of us are looking towards watching that stuff, but sometimes we don't realize it, and it becomes so normal because it's part of the events we attend, part of the games that we watch, part of the movies that we watch. It's part of the culture. And the important thing is that we look up and we realize, okay, this is something that we shouldn't have going on, right? And it's important for us to realize whether it's us, the ones that we're in the position where we have to lower our gaze, or we're actually inducing a situation for somebody to lower their gaze. Now think about that for a moment. The way we carry ourselves, it's not only the way we dress. And notice this, for both men and women, our hijab as men and women, our modesty as men and women, does not only come with what we wear, it also comes in the way we conduct ourselves. So you can be, for example, someone who's dressed very modestly, a man or a woman, right? Very respectfully. But the way you act with people in public, the way you act around people that you know they're not your direct family for you to be just completely comfortable around, you're causing so much attention coming towards you, and people are just looking and saying, who is that loud and obnoxious person, right? Laughing and talking really loud. Being attentive to the way we conduct ourselves is extremely important. And even if it's just looking at the kind of the traditional sense of viewing ourselves when it comes to our dress, think to yourself, do you want to be a fitna? Do you want to be a test, a trial for somebody else in your community? Think to yourself. On the day of judgment, let's say I'm that young man, right, that makes a sister look at me in an inappropriate way. And on the day of judgment, she complains to God and says, well, he dressed in a certain way, he carried himself in a certain way, that I looked at him in a lustful way. Do you want to be that sister that a brother looks at you and sees himself being tested, that I have to lower my gaze? And I remember having a conversation with a group of brothers and sisters once, and I basically said, do you want to be that person that you're a test? You're a test for somebody else. You're not a blessing for the other person in this community. You're a test. You're making life harder for that person. Imagine you're the person that I have to lower my gaze when I'm talking to you. Do you really want to be that? Men and women, and we're emphasizing men and women. The way we dress, the way we act, the way we conduct ourselves. That's what the Holy Prophet ﷺ is telling us here. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us through these verses. That when we're lowering our gaze, it's a culture that we have to establish for ourselves. More than anything, it's a culture. So we have to do it all together, collectively. Not only lower our gaze when we have something that we know we shouldn't be looking at, but at the same time being individuals that we're not causing that test for other people to need to lower their gaze.
And what Jalal mentioned is very critical, which is that nowadays we see this is something very cultural, that it's a culture of immodesty. And if we want to change that culture, we'll start with ourselves. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change the condition and state of a community before they change themselves. So let's start by working on ourselves, try to lower our gaze, become modest, not be a trial for someone else, and then slowly and gradually, inshallah, we could have that impact on the greater community. Now, we'll go back into this whole concept and notion of being silent. There's a beautiful hadith that talks about the positive outcomes of being silent. It's a very simple hadith, but has a lot of value in it. And what the hadith says is, أكثر صمتك يتوفر فكرك ويستنير قلبك ويسلم الناس من يدك. So this hadith tells us from Imam Ali alayhi salam, the commander of the faithful, increase your silence. So increase your silence. Try to, instead of always speaking and being that person that's talking and at times loud and obnoxious, become silent. Because when you become silent, when you increase your silence, your thinking will increase. Think about that for a second. The Imam is telling us, become a little bit more silent, your thinking will increase. Your heart will be enlightened. And people will be saved from your hands. So 3 things, Jalal, the Imam is telling us. Very simple. He's telling us, guys and girls, become a little bit more silent, and 3 things will happen. Your heart will be enlightened, your thinking will increase, and other people will be safe from your hand. Why? What is that correlation, Jalal, between silence and all these things?
Essentially, the Imam is giving you a cause and effect. Or at least correlation. At least correlation. When we're silent, we're prone to talk less, right? Because we're not talking. You're silent, you're not talking. And that also goes into another hadith of the Imam alayhi salam, where he says, "Man kathura kalamo, kathura khata'u." The person who increases in his talk also increases in his mistakes. So imagine you're putting yourself in a situation, I'm gonna talk less, be more silent. Naturally, I'm going to listen more. Naturally, my mistakes are going to decrease because I'm not saying things that are making me prone to making a mistake. Thus, there's also attached with it that thinking more. And the more we think, the more we contemplate, connecting another narration from the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that an hour of contemplation is worth 70 years of worship, or more than 70 years of worship. You're having that enlightenment into your heart, right? And when you're having all this come together, people are saved from your hand. And by that, it's symbolic, as in people are not going to be hurt by you. People are going to be protected by you. The Imam alayhi salam also says, regarding silence, and look at this, it's a very short narration, but it's so beautiful. Silence will gain serenity for you and save you the trouble of apologizing. Think about that for a second. When we're silent, when we're talking less, the Imam is telling you that you're going to get serenity, that you're going to get peace for yourself. You're going to have a calm heart. And it's going to save you the trouble of apologizing, because how many times do we talk in conversations and over again, and we find ourselves stumbling on our words and making so many different kinds of mistakes, offending people, we get defensive, we try to explain what we really meant, right? How many times have we found ourselves trying to explain what we really meant? The Imam is telling you here, practice silence, and you're going to find yourself not needing to apologize as much.
صلى على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So here we've established that in many cases, silence is a good thing. It's a positive thing. And it could result into some good things, good outcomes. Now the next question is, should that be our state at all times? So you guys are mentioning all of these ahadith from the infallibles that it's good to increase your silence, that it leads to good things, it increases your thinking, it lightens your heart. Should I be silent at all times? Is that the way to go? And the answer is no. Absolutely not. We're not saying here that we should all from now on vow and fast to become silent and not talk and not engage with anyone in a conversation, dialogue, or whatever the case may be. But what we're saying is essentially what the Imams are telling us. There is a time to be silent, and it's appropriate to be silent, and it's good to be silent, but there's also a time to speak up. Sometimes it becomes an obligation to speak up in certain cases. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this issue of speaking up in the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Rahman, where He says, Ar-Rahman allama al-Quran, khalaqa al-insan, allamahu al-bayan. The All-Beneficent. He taught the Quran, He created man, and He taught him articulate speech. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, taught you speech. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us speech, then the rational conclusion is that it has to be a positive thing. Whatever comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is only positive, it's only good. So Jalal, how is it that in certain cases, speech is a good thing, and sometimes even more so it could become a sense of obligation to speak up in certain cases?
I mean, look at all of the things that we have before us. Just looking at this presentation, for example. This presentation in general, this lecture, right? Lecture includes speaking. It's not a lecture without speaking. The Quran is all speech, right? The verses, the hadith, the narrations, they all came from that speech. Now, to answer that question, we have a really beautiful story from the Imam alayhi salam, Imam al-Sajjad, right? Our fourth Imam, the son of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He was sitting down with a group of people, and he was asked by one of his companions. And the companion asked him, he's like, Imam, what is better? Speech or silence? So basically the discussion that we're having right now, what's better? Speech or silence? The Imam alayhi salam responds and he says, each one of these has its problems. But if the problems are taken care of, then the speech is better than the silence. So if the problems are taken care of, speech is better than the silence. Then they asked, how is that? Could you explain further? What do you really mean by that? So the Imam alayhi salam continues and he says, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send prophets and guardians with silence, but rather He sent them with speech. Also, heaven is not deserved only through silence, nor could wilaya, the authority of the imams after the Prophet ﷺ, be mandated with only silence, nor could one be saved from hell with only silence. Rather, this is all with speech. And then the Imam continues and says, I'm not equating the moon to the sun in what I say. Listen to this. I'm not equating the moon to the sun in what I say. You are describing the virtue of silence through speech, but you do not describe the virtue of speech through silence. Look at that. When we're looking at speech and silence, that silence will become a virtue when the speech itself is not effective for you, and it's not good for you in that situation. Otherwise, if you can speak and what you're saying and speaking is in its right place, in its right time, and it's effective, then speech should be made. But that silence will also be effective, just like the Imam is saying, when the problems are moved away, right? That silence can be used to effectively communicate what's needed when simply being silent. Otherwise, if the problems are moved, then speech would trump it.
Now imagine this for a second. Imagine that one day you held a recorder with you. So you go about your day, you're going to work, school, taking care of family, and throughout that whole day you had that recorder on you. And that recorder records everything that comes out of your mouth. Whatever you say, it records. And at the end of the day, you go back, you play that recorder, and you listen to everything that you said. What would you hear? How much of that which you said was useful? How much of it was in its place, was beneficial? How much of it was useless, just a waste of time, a waste of breath and energy? How much was it ill? How much of it caused harm to other people? How much of it was actually good? Remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's keep that in mind. Let's keep that in mind as we're trying to improve our state. And the reason dear brothers and sisters, while we're talking about this whole issue of essentially disciplining our tongue such that we speak when it's the right time, when it's the appropriate situation, and we're silent when it's needed, is because our scholars tell us that there's different analysis on this, but some scholars say that there are more than 30 sins. Imagine, 30 sins that are caused by the tongue. Others go up to over 70 sins. Imagine that there are more than 70 sins that I can commit with my tongue by just utterly speaking. Whether it's backbiting, cursing, talking about other people, all of these things we say. For us, they're just simple words. We speak them. But behind them are sins that disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that have detrimental effect on ourselves, especially on our spirits, as we're trying to improve our spiritual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, in all of this, what we're trying to do is to look at the different things that we could improve on. And one of the things is as simple as disciplining ourselves so that when we speak, it's something that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doesn't displease Him. And also when we're silent, it's for a good reason.
And think about that with regards to the 30 plus different sins that can come just out of your speech. Backbiting, lying, cursing, talking to people inappropriately, right? Being fake with people. And this is actually a really key one that really affects all of our behavior, all of our conduct. And being genuine, sincere people that we mentioned yesterday, if you're going to be fake with people, know that you have a lot to work on. Because if you're going to be one way with one person and then a different way with another person, know that your individual, your person, is changing based on another human being in very small, insignificant scenarios. You talk to a person, you tell them, oh, I love what you're wearing, I love how you carry yourself, oh, you look so nice. And then you turn around, oh my gosh, so ugly. Right? Oh, you tell them, hey bro, how are you, man? I miss you, how you been? And then you turn around and you talk to somebody else, man, I hate that guy. That guy's so ugly. Right? This is some of the things that we find, we might find in ourselves, we might find in other people. It's so important to pay attention to because, brothers and sisters, if really we want to be, if you want to be a better person, you have to be true to yourself. And you have to be true to the people around you. Because if you're not true to yourself, how can you be true with God? If you're going to be faking the way you are with everyone. And remember the other day how we mentioned social media on Facebook and Instagram. And subhanAllah, sometimes you see people that they have a completely different personality once it comes to this virtual world. A completely different lifestyle. You should meet the person in person. They're quiet, they're reserved, they're respectful. And then you see their statuses on Facebook and you see their pictures on Instagram. Whoa, lo and behold, who is this person? Are you true to yourself? Are you sincere to yourself? And that's the most important thing. Because if you're sincere to yourself, then you can be sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And essentially, if you have that down, you're going to be sincere with the people around you. But emphasizing with that, with our tongue and what we communicate with people. If we're hurting people with our speech, if we're backbiting, if we're lying, if we're cheating, if we're doing any of these things through our speech, know that the Holy Prophet ﷺ gives us a very beautiful summary of the way your speech and your tongue, right, interacts with the rest of your organs and the rest of your senses. He tells us that if the son of Adam, right, if a human being wakes up in the morning, all of his organs complain to his tongue. And they say to the tongue, they say, listen, be conscious of God. Be fearful of God. Be fearful of God and be conscious of God. Be aware of Him through us. If you straighten up, then we'll straighten up. And if you are crooked, then we'll be crooked. So imagine everything that you're doing in your being, all your senses, all of your organs. They're telling the tongue, telling the speech, listen, if you get things down, If you're gonna be good today, if you're gonna be straight today, you speak when you need to speak, and when you speak something that's good, then we're all set. We're ready to go. You're the leader. Let's go. If you're not, if you're crooked, hey, it's not gonna be a good day for any of us. So imagine that. Imagine the power in that.
And we'll conclude with one final thought from the Prophet, where he says that if a person wants to straighten up, and the Prophet is being very real with us here. He's telling you, if you want to straighten up, then your heart has to straighten up first. And if you want your heart to straighten up, then your tongue has to straighten up. In essence, what? That a lot of these things, that my self-improvement at the core of it, part of it goes back to disciplining my tongue. It might sound very simple, but it's a big deal. Because as we said, your tongue can be a medium to pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to getting and doing good deeds. But it also could be something that can send you to hellfire if you misuse it to talk ill, to lie, to cheat, to be a hypocrite, to backbite. So let's think about that. And let's think about something that we're taught at elementary school. Think before you speak. Really, it's something that might be very basic, very fundamental, but at the core of a lot of this is this whole concept. Let's think before we speak, so that we don't say something that we will regret later on. So that we don't take our frustration and anger on our mothers or fathers, and then we retract and go back and say, I just transgressed in their right, and then you go back and apologize. Let's think before we speak. Now on that point, we'll conclude with a few verses from Dua Abi Hamza. And these verses in particular are very important, because once we recite them, you're going to realize how this is us, all of us, that the Imam is describing in these words. Basically, another way to put it, this is basically a reality check. Really it is. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma inni kullama qultu qad tahayyatu wa ta'abbat. وقمت للصلاة بين يديك وناجيتك. O Allah, whenever I thought I was prepared and ready, and rose to pray to you before your hands, and I was ready to confide in you, ألقيت علي نعاسا إذا أنا صليت وسلبتني مناجاتك إذا أنا ناجيت.
You cast a sleep on me when I prayed, and you prevented me from confiding to you when I confided.
مالي كلما قلت قد صلحت سريرتي وقربت من مجالس التوابين مجلسي.
Why is it that whenever I felt content about the goodness of my core, and when my companionship became more near or nearer to those that repent to you,
عرضت لي بلية أزالت قدمي وحالت بيني وبين خدمتك سيدي.
a sin would occur. I'd commit a sin, and it would cause my feet to stumble, and it would deprive me of your service, O Allah.
لعلك عن بابك طردتني وعن خدمتك نحيتني.
So I ask myself, why? Oh my master, maybe you have expelled me from your door and retired me from your service.
ولعلك رأيتني مستخفا بحقك فأقصيتني.
Or maybe you observed my disregard of your right on me.
أولعلك رأيتني معرضا عنك فقليتني.
Or maybe you observed my disregard of your right on me, so you distanced me. Or maybe you saw me heading away from your path, so that you withdrew me from you.
أولعلك وجدتني في مقام الكاذبين فرفضتني.
Or maybe you found me in the position of a person who is a liar, so you rejected me.
أولعلك رأيتني غير شاكر لنعمائك فحرمتني.
Or maybe you saw that I wasn't grateful for all the rewards you've given me, so you deprived me.
أولعلك فقدتني من مجالس العلماء فخذلتني.
Or maybe you observed my absence from the assembly of scholars and the people that go towards learning, so that you put me down.
أولعلك رأيتني في الغافلين فمن رحمتك آيستني.
Or maybe you found me to be one of the heedless ones, so you despaired me from your mercy.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Brothers and sisters, just as a reminder for us, when we're reciting the verses from the supplications, really at the end of the day, this is a conversation between you and God. So think to yourself, how are you going to converse with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Direct yourself so that in these words that the Imam alayhi salam, he's teaching us how to speak to God. Really bring yourself through that closeness. And there's no more effective way than speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and really putting your heart out there for Allah. So now, brothers and sisters, in that state, let's direct ourselves to the Imam of our time and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten his reappearance. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوى وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. In the last of our prayers, and Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.